Y bueno, la primera ponente que tenemos esta mañana es Hanna, que forma parte del equipo de la Agencia de Patrimonio Cultural de Países Bajos como consejera para la gestión de las colecciones coloniales. Lleva muchos años integrada en la organización de ICOM y actualmente es la codirectora del grupo de trabajo de Descolonización. Es historiadora, ha trabajado en varios museos holandeses y ha sido inspectora de colecciones estatales. Hanna, el sitio es tuyo.
Good morning, everybody. So I am here invited as the co-chair of the ICOM working group on decolonization. It was a working group, a new one installed last year by the executive board of ICOM. And it has two chairs. I do this together with Oswebo Chinedu Ishola from Nigeria. And we have 10 members from different parts of the world. One of them is with us, Camilla. I'm not sure if she's already here. Ciao, Camilla. I'm happy that she's here with us today. We have so 2 chairs, 10 members, 4 members of the executive board, and 2 very specialist secretaries at the secretariat in Paris. So we are a very good team together. And I will talk as a co-chair of this working group, but since I work in the Netherlands at the Cultural Heritage Agency, where we also keep a part of the state collection, I will also show you some of that and tell a little bit about the policy on colonial collections in the Netherlands. Right. And I will come back to this guy later. So I will speak about several aspects of decolonization, of museum work in that. It's about the impact, it's about recent developments, the loss of knowledge regarding our museum objects, collecting objects from a colonial context, provenance research, knowledge restitution, reparation. So many things will pass. And I think in that we will have like a larger view of colonization and decolonization, and what the role of the museums will be, and in that also ICOM's role. And ICOM, we will also advise ICOM on how to decolonize itself as an organization, since most of the members are coming from Europe, practically. So it's not new decolonization, but some recent developments really made it happen faster, especially discussions on colonial past and racism, and very much the Black Lives Matter movement and all the statues that were torn down, all the so-called heroes that were seen in a new light. And so we shifted from a single-sided perspective to multiple viewpoints. And in that, museums have to move along, and they have to decolonize themselves as organizations and their collections. And so they need a critical review of their history and of the collections, how they were composed. And we also recognize that the descriptions in the collection registration are not up to date anymore. They are felt as derogatory or offensive or incomplete. And I will show you some examples of that. And also we have seen more and more claims and objects being returned, restituted to the countries of origin. This is a picture I took from the internet. I think it's from 2016 already in New York, where people gathered on Columbus Day outside the Museum of Natural History, where then still was the statue of Roosevelt, accompanied by a Native American and a black man. And they gathered and protested outside, and then they went inside to have an alternative tour of the museum. And that's what they then already call decolonize this museum. And if we look into the collections at the Cultural Heritage Agency, we keep part of the state collection. We have 120,000 objects, mostly Dutch paintings, Dutch art, and Dutch applied art. But also some other types of objects that came along with bequests of painters or bequests of collectors. And I wanted to show this as an example of the things we have in our museum collections, portraits of persons who usually we have no clue actually who they were. Not most of them are being felt as so much important anymore. But if you dive a bit into their history, you will find they have links with colonial history. Like this Arnold van Tetz, early 18th century. He was, among other things, he had a role in the government in Cirebon in Indonesia, then the Dutch Indies. And all these histories we have to dig up again because we forgot them. And this is part of the research that we have to do on our museum collections. And also the way they are described. I said in the collection registration, you find offensive terms or things are missing. And I'll show you 3 portraits here of Dutch ladies accompanied by a Black person. And I took a part of the how it was described in our collection registration, and I highlighted in white and translated into English what was said. So here it was this Black boy used with another word in white, red striped coat and a silver collar. That was all that was written about this person. And the silver collar is a slave collar, actually. So if you go into your collection and you search with search terms, you might find this object, this painting, because it's not so easy. They're not tagged yet. Then they were not tagged yet as these are colonial objects or from a colonial context. And this one was already a bit more, let's say, political correct. On the left, a person in an orange coat, so very neutrally described. But in this painting, the Black boy was not mentioned at all in the collection registration. And if you search among 120,000 objects, you want to know what do we have paintings with Black persons, you would not find it. So you have to make your collection description better. And that's a lot of handwork. I always like this very much as an example of adding new narratives to your collection. These are sugar casters, early 18th century. These usually are described in an art historical way, like it's porcelain or it's ceramics and blue on white, etc. But the sugar that went into these sugar casters came from the plantations. Beet sugar was not invented yet, so it was from it came from the plantations. So you have, if you show these objects, you should add the narrative, should add this story to that. The sugar that was used was made by enslaved people, and that is decolonizing your collection. And we did this research into our collection, and we had surprising findings, like these fittings on a china cabinet. I'm not sure, maybe you would recognize, we haven't done research into this, the iconography of this fitting. But this is not described at all in the collection registration. But since we were doing a research, people working in the storage, it was an eye-opener for them, and they found this. So decolonizing means also opening your eyes and becoming more aware of what you have in your collection. So what does collecting in a colonial context mean? And maybe even collecting is not really the right word for it. So where do objects from a colonial context come from, and how were they brought here? So usually we talk about the military and the wars, the so-called punitive expeditions in Benin, for example. You see in the upper photograph, it says loot. So that's very clear. But also missionaries, be they Protestant or Catholic, they brought collections to their home, to their countries. Scientists who did research and gave names to plants and animals. The colonial rulers brought objects back. And also there were gifts from local rulers to the government, diplomatic gifts. Colonial employees who worked in the Dutch Indies, for example, they brought home many objects. We would call them tourists now, travelers. Traders, artists were interested in objects from colonial countries. And so in general, the international markets dealt with that very much in the end. And if you see, excuse me, these objects were taken often in an unequal situation. So an unequal in hierarchy, really. And usually one-sided military law was used as an instrument. And then these objects came to the museums in Western Europe, for example, and there they were sort of neutralized. I mean, the violence background was not taken into the story in these museums. It was taken in from an ethnographical and anthropological background. And so more loot. I found these ones on the internet, of course. And I'll show you a few examples of what I just mentioned. Missionary collections. In the Netherlands, in the south of the Netherlands, we have a museum that was built in 1931, and the presentation is still original. Although, of course, in the background, the way the collections are kept is modernized. And it was a natural history collection. You see here, I think it's a gorilla. And they were not, the one who stuffed this animal, the taxidermist, did not know that this was an animal. He thought it was a standing animal like a human being. So a bit misinterpreted, actually. And on the left, you see part of the interior with the collections from Papua New Guinea, I think. But also, and I think we should not forget that, because often there's this image like museums are full of loot. That is not always the case. Objects were made for the market by the end of the 19th century already, and also in the 20th century. And in our collection, we have this mask of Papua New Guinea, which came with the bequest of a modern artist, a Dutch artist. And usually curators that are specialized in paintings, for example, we don't have any idea of the value of such an object or when it's from which time it is. If somebody would tell us this is end of the 19th century and very, very important, we would believe it. So we did some research into this one. And it's made for the market. It's not stolen. It's not taken in an unequal situation. It was just made for the market. And I think we should keep that in mind too. And of course, painters, artists were interested in African art. Yesterday we talked about the decoration in textiles and then the aesthetics, etc. But I think it's really important also to mention that artists had a genuine admiration for their fellow artists in African countries, for example, and they really used it as an inspiration for their own art. So this comes from artistic view. And then, well, the science, I just took one in which you find Darwin. So all these people discovering animals, plants, and giving them their names and making them ours in a way. And then you have the counter movements now of giving native voices back and using indigenous knowledge again to better describe these objects and add other knowledge that's the original knowledge to these objects or plants or whatever. So if we look at the collections, we talk, and the museums and decolonization, we talk a lot about loss, the loss of lives in slavery, the loss of freedom, the loss of rights, the loss of family and community structures, loss of identity and language, culture, practical practices and traditions, and religion. The connection with the ancestors was lost, was broken. And indigenous knowledge was lost, the traditional knowledge, and we're trying to find that back now. The knowledge of nature and the ecosystems, the botanical and the medicinal knowledge. The loss of land, we saw it yesterday. History, and the loss of objects or cultural belongings, sacred objects, human remains, ancestral remains, and the loss of self-esteem or pride, as our colleague Asma Ibrahim in our working group from Pakistan said, we were treated as like we were nothing by the colonizers. And this mindset still lives on. And not only in their feeling, but also in the systemic racism in all that we see everywhere. So we talk about violence and trauma that still exists and lives on. So what can we do to repair, especially as a museum? So we need indigenization and going back to the ancestors, work with communities, reconnect with this lost culture and with these lost practices and languages. We need to find back the respect for nature, the traditional ecological knowledge, uh, give and ask consent and cultural rights. And especially now in sustainability context, this is very important. It's about dismantling colonial legacies, historical injustice, systemic racism, as I said. So it's getting rid of colonial structures. And we need to recognize injustice and seek reconciliation and healing. And this helps for the mental health and the well-being of people who were formerly colonized, but also for museum staff working now with these objects and receiving people from countries of origin into their museum and speak with them. That can be very confronting as well. So the well-being of the museum staff is something we also have to take into account. So in general, it's undoing what colonialism did to the mindset of the colonized, to that feeling of we are nothing, and the need to restore their pride and self-esteem. So we have to come to terms with the past, and this is a global thing. So may I dwell a little bit on what's happening in the Netherlands, because this has been taken up from our side in the Netherlands as well, very much. And we have a policy from 2022 to the end of next year. And it was based on an advice that was asked by our Minister of Culture. And the title says enough, colonial collection, a recognition of injustice. And so the policy, the advice, and now the policy is, we have to rectify historical injustice. We have to find a shared policy with countries of origin and work together. We have to do provenance research on our collections, which are maybe not our collections. We have to return unconditionally in case of involuntary loss, and also when objects that are of eminent importance that are in our museums or storages that should be that should live in other places where they come from originally. And another very important one, I think, is the accessibility of collections. So this is part of the Dutch policy. I took a brochure for those interested. It's in the over there. You can take one if you like. So the accessibility of collections, it's something most museums already have collections online. Doesn't mean that it's easily found if you're looking for something. So we have to work on that as museums. We have to work on that better. I showed two examples. We are in the Netherlands, we're working on a colonial collections data hub. And also in Germany, they are they're putting online collections from colonial contexts. So that is one way to make your collections accessible. But you can also have online visits to your storage and invite people in countries of origin viewing your collection while in your storage online. We have fellowships in the Netherlands and internships, and that is, I think, a very good way for museums to work with people. Visitors programs invite people to come and see our collections and study them and give their views on these collections. And a good example is Digital Benin, of course, of a website that shows practically all objects that were stolen in Benin. So provenance research. It's often based on archival research. And if you do so, be aware that most of the archives were built with a male, white, and colonial viewpoint, but still that you can find lots of information, of course. You can go by by event. You can search for an event where you can be sure that there was looted materials, like the Java War in 1825, 1830. The date, the place, and the event are words in your database that you can search on. We also have like 300, a list of 300,000 people that worked in the military over 400 years in the Dutch Indies. So you can go by name, or you can find it by the name of a scientist or a collector. But very often it's hard to find anything, to find any information, which is also called the violence of undocumentation. I have an example, which is a rather innocent example. I think this is not about human remains, which we don't know where they came from. We have in our collection this object, I think it's 19th century, but we're not sure, a sacrifice bowl from Asia. And we still don't know from which Asian country this object comes. So that makes it a bit hard to work together with the country of origin on getting more information. We did a pilot project with some objects in our collection to see what does it mean to do research together with somebody in the country of origin. And what do we actually need if we want to include other forms of research and knowledge? And it means also that we have to open up for different ways of thinking than we are used to. So research together with the country of origin, we have in our collection one object from the Cuba in Congo, the DR Congo. And I found a researcher in the Netherlands and a researcher in Congo to go to the Cuba people and interview them. And you see him here, Eric Kwikendi from Kinshasa in Congo. So he went there and took oral information for us to know more about this Cuba cup we have in the collection. So we need indigenous knowledge, we need spiritual knowledge sometimes, and that could be difficult for us to open up for that. Oral history, but also material research. We are going to do a pilot project next year, really going into the materials of like the molecules, or what should I say, the lab research on the materials that objects were made from, and what can we deduct from that, and can we maybe even make a database that makes it easier, if we all do this together, to find a better way to place the origin of objects. A big issue is the restitution or the repatriation, rematriation or return. The terms are all used. From the Netherlands, we gave back big collections to Indonesia, even this month lately, and a second batch will go in November. And this was about almost 300 objects, among them these enormous statues. But it doesn't mean necessarily that objects go back, because not everybody wants them back. And I have a very recent example here of the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford, where they invited the Maasai group to look into their collection and see what they should do with it. And I know this was a long project, and really working together with them. And so this Maasai group decided in the end that they did not want several objects back. And I will just read the motive. So from a Maasai perspective, these hereditary objects would never be given away or sold. And therefore, they must have been taken by killing the owner and removing it from the body on the battlefield. The objects are considered as warriors. And in Maasai tradition, when a warrior dies, they are not brought back home, but are buried in the battlefield. So that was for them the reason that they did not need the objects back home. So this is my conclusion. What does decolonization of museums mean? Well, yesterday there was the question, what does a museum look like? If it's decolonized, well, we have no real image, but these are aspects of it. So the context the concept of decolonizing museums means different things in different parts of the world. Shortly said, it depends on who you are and where you are. For museums which are a colonial structure in themselves, decolonization means co-curate, democratic curatorship, co-curatorship, building new relations, the knowledge exchange, and reaching out to younger generations, and reviewing itself as an institute, reviewing the collections, and rewriting the existing narratives. And this works actually two ways. Communities find back their history and identity, and the museum reinterprets its collections with different knowledge systems and new partnerships. For that, we need new scenarios, new models, and multiple ways. And the museum might even be changed into a community museum or a house of stories. So not the old-fashioned concept of museum anymore, if it is old-fashioned. So decolonization is not a tick box or a checklist. It's a long process. It's a transformation. And we have to be patient and respect the time it takes. And about all of this, we, as a working group, we will give a report to the executive board of ICOM with recommendations. And we already know that we will say it doesn't end with 1-2 years working group. We will need I think we will need a standing committee, because this is something that it won't be finished soon. Thank you very much.